In our episodes, we discuss cases and topics that might be distressing or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. It was around 2 a.m. on Saturday, October 26, 1996, when a truck driver traveling on U.S. Highway 136 near Kahoka, Missouri, found a woman on the side of the highway. She was badly injured, unconscious, barely breathing, and unable to speak. Her injuries suggested she had been hit by a car, but there were no other vehicles in the area. The woman was transported to a hospital in Quincy, Illinois, where she died from her injuries around 5 a.m. The victim was quickly identified as Laura Van Wyhe, a 21-year-old woman from Iowa City, Iowa. Laura worked multiple jobs. She was a home daycare provider, worked for her mother's catering business, and was a cake decorator. She was also the mother of a 1-year-old son named Samson. Laura and Samson's father, Donald Knight III, were separated, and we'll dive into the dynamics of their relationship later on, but at the time of her death, as far as I understand, the two seemed to be on cordial terms, and Laura seemed to be close with his family, which we'll get into. Once investigators identify Laura and make notifications to her family of her passing, her death is published in local newspapers. Now, initially, there was very little information published about her death, and this caused rumors to spread pretty quickly. An article by Charles Bullard in the Des Moines Register dated October 30th, 1996 talked about some of these rumors. One being that whatever happened to Laura to give her the critical injuries she sustained didn't happen where her body was found. This rumor was found to be true. Sarah Van Wyhe, Laura's sister, said authorities told her and her family that they thought she had been moved. Despite her family receiving little information on what happened to Laura, they weren't really upset about it, and they urged the public to be patient. Sarah said, quote, "We have faith they'll figure it out. They're working hard, and I'm sure they know more than they're telling anyone." Investigators asked the public, specifically anyone driving on Highway 136, between midnight on Friday to 2 a.m. Saturday between Kahoka and Medill, Missouri, to call the Clark County Sheriff's Office. As news of Laura's death started spreading, more information comes out on her movements and activities in the hours before she died. We learn that on Friday evening, October 25th, Laura and Samson went to visit Donald's family, and the get-together was actually for Laura's 21st birthday, which was just a few days prior. This is part of what makes me believe Laura and Donald were on decent terms. His family was throwing a birthday party for her. So the party is at Donald's mother's home, Rebecca Reynolds Knight. Rebecca was a member of the Van Buren County Board of Supervisors and was actually a candidate for the Iowa House at the time, a seat she does end up getting elected to. Rebecca's home is in Bonaparte, Iowa, a little over an hour south of Iowa City. Now, I don't know exactly who was at this party, except that multiple members of the Knight family were there, and Laura and Samson got there around 8 p.m. Based on my research, the party goes pretty late, and it appears as though Laura and some of the Knights had plans for the next day. Some articles say there was a family reunion they were having the next day. Some say there was a parade they all wanted to watch the next morning. Whatever the plans were, Laura decides to stay the night with relatives of the Knights who lived in Kahoka, Missouri, which is just about 30 minutes south of Bonaparte, right in northern Missouri. An article by Charles Bullard in the Des Moines Register begins to shed more light on her last hours, and I'm going to read directly from this article. John Bergman, who lives near Kahoka, said Van Wyhe was staying with relatives near Kahoka Friday night because she planned to attend a parade in southern Iowa Saturday. Bergman said Van Wyhe apparently ran out of diapers for her son and attempted to walk to a nearby convenience store to buy some. Bergman said authorities told the family she was critically injured by a hit-and-run driver. An unnamed Missouri trooper told the Associated Press that the accident probably did not occur where the body was found, but Bergman said authorities were misled by the coat Van Wyhe was wearing. The coat belonged to a man who lived in the house where she was staying, said Bergman, and he had been hunting in the coat. Bergman said the coat had burrs stuck to it, which apparently caused authorities to suspect Van Wyhe had been struck someplace else and moved. Now, in that same article where it talked about Laura's sister addressing rumors about her sister's death, she brings up the idea that Laura left to go buy more diapers. Sarah said she did not believe that was the case, because while Laura did leave Sampson's bag and Bonaparte, she also left her purse there. To Sarah, this goes against the notion that she would have left for that reason, because she didn't have any money with her. When I read this, though, I thought perhaps she would have borrowed some cash. I mean, if one of my friends were in that situation, I would absolutely lend them money, but why would she then be walking? Her and Sampson were driven to this home, so you wonder why they couldn't have given her a ride too, if she was really leaving to go get diapers. An article published on October 31st detailed some more information on her stay. First, the article says the home she was staying at belonged to Tony and Sarah Bergman, Rebecca Reynolds Knight's daughter and son-in-law. Laura and Sampson got a ride there and stayed the night with Tony and Sarah and their 2 daughters, 5 years old and 1 year old. This article also clarifies that they plan to get up early to march in a parade for Rebecca's Iowa House campaign, and that Laura and the Bergmans' 5-year-old daughter decided to camp out in the living room to sleep. Now, yes, Laura is 21 years old and their daughter was 5, but Laura was a daycare provider, so I could see maybe the daughter suggesting they camp out and Laura going along with it, especially if she's really good with kids. But then, the article says, sometime before 1:50 a.m., Laura got up, got dressed, and left the home for unknown reasons. So John Bergman before had said Laura left to go buy some diapers. Laura's sister Sarah doesn't believe that to be the case, and this article says she left for unknown reasons. Now, we also learned a little more about the scene. Laura's backpack was discovered in a tree a distance from where she was ultimately found, and the force of the impact knocked her out of her shoes, but she was also clutching a water bottle. In this article, Missouri State Trooper Bruce Clemens said they were not looking at this as just a hit-and-run accident. He said, quote, "You know that there's more involved, but you know I'm not at liberty to discuss things like that." He added that investigators had not identified any suspects. So the language around her death had been a little cagey up until this point. They've been saying her injuries are consistent with her being struck by a vehicle, but they add that they believe she sustained her injuries elsewhere. They hadn't been saying it was a homicide yet at this point, just a suspicious death. They hint towards a hit and run, but are also saying they aren't looking at it as just a hit and run. It's all over the place. On October 31st, the results from Laura's autopsy were published in local newspapers. At least that's how the news articles phrase it. There was really not a lot of information. An article from this day in the Iowa City Press-Citizen states that from the autopsy, it was confirmed that the injuries to Laura were consistent with being in a car accident, but that she died of, quote, multiple injuries. In this article, Adams County, Illinois coroner Chris Boyer said he was still waiting for a pathologist report on the autopsy. He also said he planned to call a 6-member coroner's jury to determine the official cause of death, which could take at least 3 weeks. Even with this news, and seeming confirmation that she had been struck by a vehicle, investigators still considered her death to be suspicious and were not ruling out foul play. And really at this point, in my head, I'm like, well, of course foul play has to be there. If she got hit by a car, and there's no car there, and you don't know who hit her, it would be a hit and run. So I think at that point, the question is, was it just a random stranger that hit her and kept going, or did someone intentionally hit her? I don't know. Reporting on Laura's death really slowed during the month of November, with a few articles reminding the public that authorities were looking for information on any vehicles driving on Highway 136. Getting into December, local newspapers began highlighting friends of Laura's who had organized a big concert event in Laura's memory, and to help raise money for Sampson. Additionally, while waiting on more details from the coroner's inquest, Laura's mother, Leanne, and Donald Knight began petitioning the court, both fighting for custody of Sampson, which we'll get into later on. On December 14th, a flood of information comes out on the case, as details of testimony from the coroner's inquest were made public. An article by Charles Bullard in the Des Moines Register provides a ton of clarifying information, so let's go over some of the main points. The coroner's jury determined Laura's death was not accidental. The 6-member jury ruled Van Wyhe died of brain trauma, massive blood loss, and blunt force trauma to the head and legs. The jury said that while they don't know what exactly caused the injuries, they don't believe it was accidental. More information on her injuries and the state of the crime was revealed. Bruce Clemens, the Missouri State Trooper who was heading the investigation, said Laura lost massive amounts of blood, but that there wasn't that much blood at the scene, adding to the belief that she wasn't hit in the spot she was found in. Additionally, remember the jacket she was wearing? John Bergman was quoted in that previous article saying that Laura had been wearing a jacket and that it threw investigators off. He said the jacket belonged to a man who lived in the house she was staying at. Well, that was true. The jacket belonged to Tony Bergman. But Trooper Clemens said the jacket she was wearing had little to no blood on it, that it was in brand new condition and unmarked. Clemens said, quote, "She didn't get hit while she was wearing that jacket." And apparently, Laura had been wearing a hat and a separate jacket earlier in the night, but that they were never found. More strange notes about the scene were revealed, and I'm going to read directly from this article by Charles Bullard. When she was found, Sampson's baby blanket was stuffed under Tony Bergman's jacket, and Sampson's cooked rice was in a pocket of the jacket. An open pocket knife belonging to Bergman was found in another pocket, and Van Wyhe, who was still breastfeeding Sampson, was clutching his water bottle. She was barefoot and her shoes were found nearby. A tote bag belonging to her and Sampson was found in a tree some distance from the highway. A single footprint matching her shoes was found in a cornfield near the highway. The trooper told the jury he believes the footprint was staged and the jacket was placed on Van Wyhe. Although Sampson was found unclothed in the Bergman's home, Clemens testified Sampson was outside with Van Wyhe at some point. The trooper testified that Knight had abused Van Wyhe and they no longer were a couple. He said they had ceased sexual relations some time ago. There was no evidence Van Wyhe had been raped. The trooper said Van Wyhe had a swollen lip. Tony Bergman had abrasions on the knuckles of his right hand, but Bergman said he injured the hand when he struck a clock after hearing about Van Wyhe's death. Now, I will say this article says she had cooked rice in the pocket of Tony's jacket that she was wearing, but some other articles say she had baby food on a paper plate instead, so I have never gotten clarification on that. Additionally, during the coroner's inquest, Clemens testified that partygoers said Van Wyhe and others at the party had smoked marijuana, but her autopsy showed no alcohol or drugs in her system. Clemens said those she smoked marijuana with were either mistaken or lying. This article also says that it was Donald Knight, so Sampson's father, who had driven Laura and Sampson from their home to the party in Bonaparte, and that Laura, the Bergmans, and Sampson left the party around 11:30 p.m. to head to the Bergmans' home in Kahoka, where they went to bed shortly after midnight. What still isn't known, though, is why Laura got up to leave the home. Clemens said at this point no prime suspect had been identified. He said, quote, "There's a cast of characters. We haven't closed the door on anyone yet. Right now, the stuff we have leads us right back to Tony and Sarah. But that doesn't mean they're involved." Clemens said the Bergmans and Knight have refused to take a polygraph, and I read in other articles that they quickly stopped talking with law enforcement. And I will say, this is a hot take. I do not view that as a sign of guilt. Personally, and this is maybe just my experience having worked at a public defender's office, I would never take a polygraph. Always get a lawyer, 100%, all the time. Never speak to police without an attorney. Moving on. On December 31st, 1996, the Des Moines Register reports that a judge had awarded temporary custody of Sampson to Laura's mother, Leanne Thompson. Johnson County District Court Judge David Remley ruled Leanne should be the temporary guardian of Sampson because his father, Donald, quote, has a long history of drug abuse and is a convicted felon. He had been convicted of second-degree criminal mischief, a felony, and fourth-degree theft on April 17, 1989. While on probation for that, he was convicted of fifth-degree theft, and in February of 1996, he was convicted of marijuana possession. The judge went on to say, quote, Donald is not a suitable and qualified person to serve as the temporary guardian of Sampson. The judge said in addition to Donald's long-term drug and alcohol abuse, he had also allegedly been physically abusive towards Laura. Laura had been the primary care provider for Sampson since her and Donald had separated in July of 1996. And the reason for their separation, according to the judge, was that Donald had hit her. I saw in some other articles that this had potentially happened on a trip the two had taken to Montana, and Laura had actually come home from that trip by herself on a bus. After Laura died, Donald actually lived with Laura's mom, so Leanne Thompson, the one he was battling for custody over. He also worked at her catering company, but while he was living there, Leanne said she found a large bag of marijuana in the room he shared with Sampson. Donald's drug abuse apparently dated back to when he was 14 years old, and at the time of Laura's death, he was 26. He had gone to treatment twice, but continued using. Now, the articles only mention marijuana and alcohol use. I really don't know if he had used any other types of drugs. But the judge said that Donald's inability to deal with stressful situations and his lack of demonstrated responsibility also contributed to his decision to award temporary custody to Leanne. The judge concluded that Leanne is, quote, qualified and suitable to serve as Sampson's temporary guardian. Now, Donald immediately appealed the decision and asked the Supreme Court to reestablish him as Sampson's legal guardian. In his appeal, he said the judge's ruling didn't find there had been harm or neglect of Sampson while he was in his care, and that it, quote, totally disregards the strong societal and legal preference in preserving the natural parent-child relationship. They also cite a, quote, turbulent relationship between Laura Van Wyhe and her mother, Leanne, and argue that this relationship shows that Leanne being the guardian would be, quote, detrimental. Now, they also argued that there was no evidence Donald had ever used drugs or alcohol in Sampson's presence, and that he had taken an active role in his son's life, attending birthing classes, and they claim he actually helped deliver the baby himself with the help of a midwife. His attorneys also filed a motion to stop the transfer of custody until the appeal was considered. But by that time, it seems as though Leanne already had Sampson in her custody, and ultimately the request to delay the transfer was denied. Now, in 1997, there were almost no articles on Laura's death or the investigation into her murder, aside from one in March saying that officials were waiting for lab testing to be completed on some evidence collected. Deputy Bill Conger of the Clark County, Missouri Sheriff's Department, who took over the investigation in 1997, said, quote, we're doing little things, but we're mainly waiting on evidence. Conger went on to say, quote, hopefully there is evidence of somebody else there or somebody involved or something. I don't know. Then we'd have a lead. So, not a very promising statement. Now, I couldn't find any reporting on what came of those tests or what they were testing, but time goes on and there is just no movement in the case. Laura's family starts a reward fund hoping to encourage someone to come forward, but no one does. Laura's case fades in reporting and she gets what I call the cold case treatment. Every few years around the anniversary, a newspaper will run a special feature showing unsolved cases in the state. They'll do a half-page summary of the case, sometimes offering a few new details. On July 24th, 2016, as part of the Des Moines Register's, quote, Gone Cold series, they run a special on Laura's unsolved murder, and it does provide a couple of details that I didn't see in articles in 1996. In this article, it notes that there weren't any markings in the gravel where her body was found that would have indicated she had pulled herself to where she was found on the side of the highway. It also says that there were no vehicle debris like headlight pieces or metal fragments where she was found, and this added to their belief that she had been struck somewhere else. They also say that paint chips found embedded in Laura's clothing hadn't been matched to any vehicle. Here, it also says that in 1999, Sergeant Randy King of the Missouri Highway Patrol said, quote, "I'm not convinced that Laura was intentionally struck, but I'm convinced she was struck and left alongside the road and her child was taken from her along the road." This part, that quote really threw me off, and I want to move into theories because some of the comments that have been made are just strange. First, statements from authorities are all over the place. I understand the change in descriptions as more information comes out, but they say it's suspicious, and then they label it as not an accident. Then they treat it as a homicide. They say she wasn't hit where she was. They say they're treating it as, quote, more than a hit and run. But then this guy in 1999 says he isn't convinced that she was hit on purpose. Then the comments that have been made to suggest that Sampson was with her when she got hit throw me off. Because then what? Was Laura hit and like Sampson was with her? And then what did they do? Bring Sampson back to Tony and Sarah's home? Clemens had testified that at some point Sampson was outside with her. And he was apparently found after she was hit back at Tony and Sarah's home. And some articles say in the nude, some say unclothed. It makes no sense. I could see in a diaper. Many kids that age just run around in diapers. But again, like if it was a stranger that hit Laura and Sampson was with her, like how would they know to bring Sampson back to Tony and Sarah's? That doesn't make any sense. To me, that shows that it would have been someone that knew her. Then there's the scene. She's wearing Tony's jacket, and Clemens is certain she wasn't wearing it when she was hit. There are burrs on it, and there weren't burrs where she was lying, but there's a burr bush on the other side of the road, and some articles say that that suggests that there was a struggle on the other side of the road. She's holding a plate with food on it or has food in her pocket. She's clutching a water bottle. Her shoes had been thrown off, but there's a footprint near the cornfield across the road, and Clemens thinks that that footprint was staged. I mean, I almost don't even have a theory for this. Did she get into an argument with someone in the home? With Donald? Was he at Tony and Sarah's house? Did she say she was leaving and maybe trying to walk off with Sampson? Did whoever she was arguing with run up and they got into a fight near a burr bush, getting burrs on the coat, and then she tried walking away and was hit with a car on purpose or by accident? Then what? Did they move her to the other side of the road? Because there's no debris on the ground. But why is there then this belief that the jacket was put on her after she was hit? That doesn't make any sense. None of it makes sense. I have walked through so many scenarios in my mind, but I cannot make sense of this crime scene. It has been nearly 30 years, and Laura Van Wyhe's murder remains unsolved. Someone out there has to know something. Someone driving on that road, someone who came home with a busted vehicle, someone knows something. This case is so baffling. There are so many comments from authorities and aspects of the crime scene that just make no sense. If you have any information at all, please come forward and I will put where you can report those tips in the description of this episode. And to my listeners, I want to know what you think about this case. Leave me a comment on social media, send me an email. I want to know your thoughts. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and sharing this episode with others. You can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with the handle @CardinalCrimes, and you can send us any case suggestions, questions, or topics you would like covered there or to our email, cardinalcrimes@gmail.com. Until next time, friends, take care of each other and take care of yourself. If you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, there's no better place to begin than with Buzzsprout. It's the platform I use, and it makes publishing, promoting, and tracking your episodes so easy, even if you're not tech savvy. Plus, they help you get listed in all the major directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. And here's the best part. When you sign up for a paid Buzzsprout plan using my affiliate link, you'll get $20 off, and you'll be supporting the show at the same time. Just head to the description of this episode to find the affiliate link. Now, let's get back to the episode.